have. But the more substantive issue that I want to raise has to do with the prioritization of roles within this nursery and primary sub-program. This is a sum of over $8.5 million that is going to retroactive pay for watchmen for minimum wage, as it says here, which absolutely should be done, but also makes reference to these janitor and general worker posts. I don't know if it is a situation that because children are back in schools and because we still have to be very watchful with respect to COVID, whether these positions are now required. I would love to have an explanation on that. But the greater point really has to do with nursery and the capacity of the education system to accommodate children in nursery schools. It is a perennial problem. And I am reflecting the concern that has been shared with me by many of my constituents as recently as this morning, that some of their efforts to get their children into nursery schools do not bear fruit, in part because there are not enough places, there are long waiting lists, and so on. So it begs the question about the prioritization of these resources and whether there is not scope or should not be scope to look at the issue of capacity at the nursery school level. Now, the government of Barbados said in the last term, and we said as well in the 2018 manifesto, that this is not something that a government can do alone, and that is granted. But there was meant to be an effort to collaborate with the private sector to expand the availability of nursery places, especially for those who live in and around urban St. Michael. Part of that effort was supposed to have seen collaboration with the private sector, in particular in areas where we tend to see women's labor concentrated. What used to be, and we used to have much more representation of these kinds of enterprises, call centers and so on. And the idea at the time was to collaborate with the Ministry of Industry and to make sure that there was availability of daycare, day nurseries, and so on for people to be able to return to work. This is not simply a question of having spaces, early childhood education spaces for infants to be able to start their education properly. But it's also a question of women's capacity or the primary caregiver's capacity to go back to work or to find work. And I believe that all members are aware that one of the constraints, in particular to women being able to work, is whether they can find adequate daycare facilities. So while this over $8.5 million is being allocated for this purpose, and I hear the explanation that it is retroactive, I'm not clear on whether these recently created janitor and general worker posts, not to say that there should not be janitors and general workers, but I think it's important also to acknowledge that we have made a commitment to expand nursery capacity in this country, and I wanted to know the extent to which we are going to be able to honor that commitment, if at all.